Hello, everyone. Welcome back for our Wednesday at 1 p.m. workshop with NuView Trust Company. So today, our topic is not all real estate investments are equal. Pretty interesting topic. So we're going to cover a range of variety of different real estate investment options that you can do in self-directed IRAs. But before we get started, just a few things. NuView we're a self-directed IRA custodian. We are not tax advisors. We're not financial advisors. We're not CPAs. Although we do have lots of knowledge, you still want to discuss any investment details with whoever your financial advisor would be. And we custody different types of IRAs, education savings accounts, health savings accounts, as well as solo 401ks. Any of those types of plans, they can be self-directed. So what is a self-directed IRA? Well, just like it sounds, it's self-directed. You get to choose your investments. You don't have somebody like a stockbroker picking and choosing stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. You're investing in things that you might already be investing in, things that you might understand. Things like real estate, private lending, mortgage notes, tax liens, cryptocurrency, precious metals. So these things are more common, more tangible type of assets. And why would you want to do it in a self-directed IRA versus doing it with your cash? Well, you're getting diversification in your retirement portfolio. You're also getting a tax savings, depending the type of IRA you're using or health savings account, they're all taxed differently. I'm going to go through some of those details with you. Not only that, you're investing in what you know best. So these are the types of plans that can be self-directed. You have a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, probably the most common types of IRAs that clients have. Traditional IRAs usually come from previous employer plans. So if you ever left an employer, you have an old 401k, you're in the military, you have a TSP, maybe you were a teacher, you have a 403b. Those types of plans are pre-tax dollars, and you can do what's called a direct rollover into a traditional IRA. That's how most clients get that account started. Once it's in a traditional IRA, now you can start making those types of investments that I mentioned. The contributions each year to a traditional IRA is $6,000. If you're over the age of 50, there's an additional $1,000 catch-up contribution. Then you have your Roth IRA. The Roth IRA is a little bit different. It's taxed differently. I'm going to explain the differences. So a Roth IRA, when you make the contributions, which $6,000 a year you can contribute, same thing as a traditional $1,000 catch-up contribution. So you're going to pay the taxes on it now, and it's going to grow for you tax exempt. And then when you take it out after age 59 and a half years old, you can take it out tax-free. Versus a traditional IRA works the other way around. You're going to make those contributions and they're tax deductible. Then you're going to invest that money. And when you're 59 and a half years old and you're ready to start taking that money out, well, it's tax deferred. So that means you're paying the taxes on it when you take those distributions. Now, most people don't take those distributions until they're officially retired, because at that point, they're at their lowest tax bracket. So they might be paying less taxes than if they took the money out while they're still employed. But remember, there's a 10% penalty if you do take a distribution before the age 59 and a half years old, because this is meant for retirement, so retirement money. Then you have your employer plan. So if you're listening, you're self-employed, you want to listen to these plans. You have your solo 401k plan that has a higher contribution limit. It's $61,000 a year with an additional $6,500 catch-up contribution if you're over the age of 50. This is a cool plan because this is the only plan exempt from the UDFI tax, unrelated debt financed income tax. Now, what does that mean? So if you were investing in something like, say, real estate, and that real estate, you didn't have enough money in the IRA to make the investment, so you took a loan out. Now we're talking about an IRA here. You're using leverage, you're using borrowed money. So the government says, hey, you couldn't have made that investment without that leveraged portion. So we're going to tax you on the leveraged portion of the profits. But if you did the same thing in a solo 401k plan, it's exempt from the UDFI tax. It's the only plan exempt from that. Then you have your SEP IRA. This is also known as, some people like to call it a self-employed pension plan, but has a high contribution limit of also $61,000. There is a difference. This one does not have a catch-up contribution if you're over the age of 50. This is an employer contribution, and it's up to 25% of what your earned income is at the end of the year. That's how you can max that 61,000. So you have to be a high earner to be able to max that out. But hey, if you still made $100,000 at the end of the year, you can still contribute up to $25,000. So that's a good amount of money you can contribute to that plan still. Then you have a simple IRA. The simple is good for small businesses. It's $14,000 a year. You can contribute with an additional $3,000 catch-up contribution if you're over the age of 50. And if you do have employees that are eligible for benefits, that means they work over 1,000 hours a year, there's a mandatory 3% match on the employer side. A few other plans that most people don't know can be self-directed. An education savings account can be self-directed. It's only $2,000 a year that you can contribute to that, and that is for your kids and grandkids. Now, contributions can only be made up until the point the child reaches 18 years old, and that child can then use that money for any education expenses like books, tuition, internet, uniforms. It could even be used for private school. Then you have your health savings account. Most people don't know that a health savings account can be invested, and they just use that money for their medical expenses. But why not invest that money, accumulate your medical expenses, save those receipts, keep that money invested and working and growing for you, and then take that money out later on when you're ready to. So you can contribute $7,300 if it's a family plan. And if it's just yourself covered under the plan, it's $3,650 you can contribute each year. There is a catch-up contribution if you're over the age of 55, and there's an additional $1,000 on top of that. Now, the only way you are allowed to have a health savings account is if you have a high deductible healthcare plan. So that's something you might want to speak with your benefits person, your HR person, and find out if you're eligible for the health savings account. All right, so what type of investments can you make in a self-directed IRA? Well, you have your private entities, or if you're investing in a startup company, any type of LLC, any private placement, that would fall under private entities. Now, real estate, the list goes on and on. There's all different types of real estate. It could be land, you could buy tax liens, apartments, you can invest in offshore real estate, commercial property. So there's a lot of different things you can do with real estate. Then you have your cryptocurrency, and you have your private lending mortgage notes, your unsecured notes, secured notes. Just depends on your strategy. We can dive deeper into some of these asset classes and some of our other classes that we've done. You can find those on our social media. So if you follow us on YouTube, you can see some of our previous classes where we dive deeper into like promissory notes or syndications, cryptocurrency. So with that being said, I'm real happy to introduce our guest speaker, Wayne Snell. He's the Chief Investment Officer for Crowd Capital. He has 50 plus years of experience in both active and passive real estate investments across different asset classes. Now, most recently, he's managing a $50 million portfolio of mortgage notes and single-family residencies, while he's giving hundreds of families a second chance to keep their homes. That's a pretty cool thing he's doing there. Now, his extensive project management, leadership, and financial governance experience uniquely qualify him to lead the investment team. Wayne, I'm happy to introduce you and let you take over from here, and then I will jump back in for a Q&A. Audience that you're listening, if you have questions along the presentation, go ahead and type those in the Q&A section, and we will read those off at the end of the presentation.
Great. Thank you for NuView Trust for giving us the opportunity to speak. My name is Wayne Snell, and I'm with Crowd Capital, and we are a residential mortgage notes fund that delivers strong investor returns as well as social impact at scale. Our mission is to help families at risk of foreclosure keep their homes and increase their financial stability. And today, what I plan to talk about is the let me just get my thing going. So first of all, hope you can see my screen. Before I get started, though, I'm sorry. I do need to mention, since we are a fund, that the information I'm sharing today's workshop is for informational purposes only. So that means nothing in this presentation should be construed as investment solicitation. And for the various types of real estate investments that I'm discussing, they may not be suitable for all investors, just like you saw with Brian's disclaimer earlier. You should definitely consult your investment and tax advisors before making any investment decisions. So with that in mind, with all the craziness we're seeing in today's equities and bonds markets, alternative asset classes such as real estate have become a great way, and have always been a great way, to diversify your portfolio, grow wealth, and create income. Over the next 30-40 minutes, what I want to do is highlight the 7 most common residential real estate investments. I'm not going to be talking about commercial and things like that, which are also viable. There are pros and cons for each of those 7 strategies and scenarios that I'm talking about today. But since this is an IRA workshop, I will mention that some of the real estate investment scenarios I'm covering may be more or less beneficial to your specific IRA needs versus others. I'll point them out as I go through this. And we have time for question and answer at the end. I do need to say that in the time we have, we can't go pretty deep into any one of the scenarios, but I did co-author a paper that delves more deeply into each of these categories. So at the end of the presentation, if you're interested, I'll give you a way you can get access to that full report. So I'm going to start with, so why am I talking about the subject in general? Well, I've spent much of my life working in the highly demanding do-or-die mentality of the high-tech computer software industry. And while that was lucrative, one of the things that it was really impressed upon me was I wanted to create numerous cash flow, passive cash flow streams for me and my families so I could eventually slow down and enjoy my life and maintain the standard of living I had. So I found that some of the categories of real estate were great for accomplishing this, but not all were as easy as others. What I'm going to do in this presentation is cover those different real estate activities that I handled over the last 15 years while seeking that passive income stream nirvana. Some work well, some did not, quite frankly. This presentation is not all inclusive. As I mentioned, I'm not covering real estate, commercial real estate transactions such as office spaces, strip centers, or storage units in here, but they're certainly viable investments as well, and I certainly recommend that you take a look at them. I also need to mention, it's more of a personal disclaimer, that just because the real estate investments that I'm talking about here did or did not work for me doesn't mean that they will or will not work for you. So you definitely want to take a look at all this. There's really three types of direct investments that I want to cover in today's presentation. I mentioned there's 7, but the first 3 are physically investing in direct real estate. So the first approach is the one most people think about, which is purchasing residential properties to rent them out. By far, that's the most common. Anybody can do it, mom and pops, institutions, hedge funds. In fact, a lot of them do. But just because anyone can do it doesn't mean that everybody should. So let's take a look at why. First, I'm going to be talking to you guys as if you're individual investors using your IRA. So as individual investors, the single family approach, the residential one house, doesn't need as much capital as some of the other ones I'm going to be talking about in a minute or two. You can usually start around $100,000, maybe $200,000 or less. And as Brian mentioned, you can even use leverage to increase the power of your IRA while you're doing that. So as I mentioned, 100,000 less, it really depends upon the condition of the property, where you are located in the US or the nation or the world, if you do use leverage. And there are single family homes that you might be able to rent for 1 year, 2 years. There's short-term rentals like Airbnbs. So there's a bunch of different scenarios. You can maybe combine the two, such as a seasonal rental. And one of the biggest and easiest strategies you can do as an individual is purchase a single family home. It's also the hardest at the same time. So let's talk about this a little bit. Oh, sorry. And how you measure success is by cash on cash returns. So the monthly cash flow, and then the appreciated value of the property, or depreciated if the market changes. So what you paid for it and what you get out of it when you actually exit the asset at some point in the future. So let's talk about the advantages. So first of all, it does require generally the least amount of startup capital to get started. As I mentioned, you can use your IRA. There's pretty simple education necessary. A lot of people know how to buy houses, right? It takes a little bit more knowledge to find the right tenant potentially, but quite frankly, you can do that. There are ways, you have full control over the investment itself, meaning you own the home. You can decide who goes in it, as long as you're not breaking any laws. You can, evict people if they're not paying you. You can improve the property. You can leave it alone. You can do whatever you want. And because it is a single family rental, a residential rental, you are able to take advantage of significant tax advantages, such as depreciation on the property, maintenance and repair costs. If you have used leverage, mortgage interest, paying property taxes and insurance, they're all write-offs. Any marketing costs to acquire a tenant. Now, I mentioned that some of those things are not applicable in your IRA. So you want to talk to your tax advisors and determine if you can write off the things I just talked about, or is it just a way to reduce your cost basis over time? And there are different strategies that your tax advisors can work with you to help out. I also need to mention that it's pretty important from a disadvantage perspective that you're not self-dealing if you buy this thing in your IRA. It's a pain in the butt to find tenants. You want to do the right thing. You want to do a credit check. You want to do background checks to make sure that they're going to be able to pay you not only today, but over the long term. And you're hoping to get a tenant that's going to want to be in your property for multiple years, so you're not having to do any sort of turnover repairs. Because that turns into the next step, which is the property upkeep and maintenance. As you own a property and you become the landlord, so to speak, you're responsible for managing all the maintenance. You know, they're going to call you at night if the air conditioner stops or if there's a plumbing problem. Now, you could hire a property management company to handle some of these problems if they arise. The challenge with that is it cuts into your profits. And for one or two residences, it may not make sense from a cost advantage perspective. And I mentioned the self-dealing rules. So if you don't have a property management company and you decide to go over and try and fix that leaky pipe, officially you are breaking the rules as it stands with the IRS, because you're providing a service to your own IRA. So I just want to make you aware of that. You have to be very careful. Now, will you get caught? I don't know. I've heard that some people's IRAs have been blown up because they've done significant amount of work on their property. So just be aware of that. And then if you use leverage to assist with the purchase in your IRA, your investment may also be subject to UDFI, which is the unrelated debt finance income tax that Brian talked about a little bit ago. If you use your solo 401k, then that's not an issue. I do recommend that when you are purchasing any single family properties or any sort of resident where you're going to be renting it out, that you review the transaction before you make it, both with NuView and your tax advisor. So that brings us to the next most common strategy that most IRA holders invest in, and that's the multifamily, which is essentially any property where you can have more than one family living. That could be things like student housing. It could be an apartment complex, which is the most common, vacation condos, senior living centers, and there's a lot of those. Either you're purchasing it yourself and running it, or you can also be part of what's called a limited partnership syndication, where you might have a lead person or a company that actually goes and purchases the apartment complex, and then investors like yourselves put in shares or maybe 10% of the investment as a passive investor. I'm going to talk about if you buy it yourself first, okay? It is a way to get a lot more cash flow quicker and build a portfolio faster, because under one roof, you can have 20, 50, 100 different residents, therefore paying you 20, 50, or 100 different rents every month, so larger cash flow. And then one of the advantages is if you have to do any sort of repairs or any sort of expenses or capital improvements, you're sharing the wealth across each of those assets, each door, as it's called in the apartment complex world. So you're lowering the average cost per unit by doing that versus single family where all the costs are related to the one house. And then there's a terminology called net operating income. That's actually how you measure the success. You're trying to improve your net operating income. And that goes back to what you're actually purchasing in the first place. If you're buying an apartment complex that needs work, so maybe you're trying to bring it from what's called a Class C or maybe a Class B up to a B or A, you're increasing the value where you're able to modify or essentially renovate each unit, and as they become vacant, then bring them up to a higher quality, increase your rents, and then by doing that, you're actually increasing the cash flow and the net operating income. You could do that, or you could just buy one that's already cash flowing and is a Class A, and you're just happy with collecting the money. That's completely up to you and your business strategy. Another thing you can do to increase the value of a multifamily would be to increase income through value-added activities. So not just making each rental unit more valuable, but you can add additional services like laundry services. I know some apartment complex operators will have added in, well, they've replaced the coin-operated laundry services with things like digital, where you know, it's just charged through their phone and added to their rent every month. Or you can even offer preferred parking where somebody pays for that, where it's maybe covered. So in the winter, for northeastern areas where there's a lot of snow, that's very intriguing to some tenants. So that's other ways to increase your revenue. So what are the advantages of a multifamily rental property? Well, you know, the obvious is the more units you have, the more cash flow you can receive. So that's always good. You do benefit from the economies of scale. As I mentioned, you're spreading any maintenance efforts, any work across all of the units. So let's say you have to capitalize a new roof for your multifamily apartment complex, and you have 50 units in one building. Well, you're able to share that cost across all 50 units, and that's a great way to you know, to reduce the costs associated with each and every unit. There are a lot of different assets and strategies available for diversification, as I mentioned. And like a single family, you can write off your maintenance and repair costs, your mortgage, your management fees, and things like marketing costs to find tenants, and depreciation. But again, some of that may not be applicable to your IRA. And if you're a participant in a syndication, then you're going to receive something called a partnership K1, which is essentially a partnership report at the end of the year that you provide to your IRA custodian, NuView, to show you the expenses and the revenue that you've gained as part of that partnership. The disadvantages is exactly the same issue, right? The more units you have, the more risk you have. Things like potentially a fire happening in one unit and spreading to multiple units, and then you lose the revenue of many, you never know. You see that in the news all the time where people are displaced. Or weather issues, or hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. So there's perils that you have to worry about. It costs a lot more to get involved in a multifamily. If you're purchasing a unit yourself, it could be significantly more, from anywhere from $250,000 to multi-millions, depending upon the property and the type that you're looking at. If you're participating in a syndication, most of the syndications require a minimum of $50,000, $100,000, and require you to be accredited, by the way. And as I mentioned, property upkeep and maintenance, yes, you can spread the wealth across each of the units, but it still is usually a larger cost because there's more of them to work on at the same time. And unfortunately, just like single family houses, this is a super competitive market. You know, if you, first of all, a lot of multifamily doesn't come on the market. And when it does, there are multiple offers, sometimes above asking price. And so you just have to worry about the fact that it's competitive. So that brings me to the third physical direct investment. And that's the one that, you know, you always see on HGTV, and that's the wonderful fix and flip, where you purchase a distressed property at a discount. And then the goal is you fix it up, you bring it to market value, and then you sell it for a profit. Some people love that because you don't have to deal with tenants, right? Some people enjoy the effort of making something ugly beautiful again. And beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I always warn you, do not make it what you want it to look like, but what the market conditions want it to look like. It does require a lot of project management skills. I've done this. I don't like it. I got out of the fix and flip space pretty early, where I stayed in the rental and the multifamily, single family and multifamily for quite a while. It is an active investment. And what I mean by that is you're doing the work. Now, you may not be doing the physical work, but you're still involved all the way through it, from convincing somebody to sell you the property at a discount to get the price you need to make the profit later, handling the contractors as they go through the work, or I guess doing it yourself if you're handy, but that does impact, again, your IRA if you're doing any work because you're self-dealing. And then how you measure the success of that is the profit you make, right? So you buy it at a discount, whatever that is. We'll say maybe $100,000 house, you put $50,000 into it, and then instead of selling it for $150, you sell it for $300. So you've made $150,000 of profit. You could also very easily not make profit. So let's talk about those. Fix and flip is fairly hard, and here's why. I'll start with the disadvantages. You got to deal with contractors, and I'm not saying that contractors are bad, but as we all know, the demo is not exactly what you get in the reality, right? Contractors have issues with supply chains right now, like everybody does. You have to pick the right one, and you have to project manage them. There's almost always going to be hidden costs inside the house. When they start tearing out walls, you're going to find things, termites, hidden rooms. I've heard about that. Or aluminum wiring. And now that you're trying to bring this house up to present day value, you now have to worry about present day code situations. And that means it could be very expensive. It is highly competitive. The wholesalers, the fix and flippers, a lot of people are trying to pick up these properties, and for good reason, because there is a lot of profit to be made. And when you actually do sell this, any income you make is considered ordinary income. But there are advantages, and that is, one, you can get into it for less money. You can use your IRA capital. You can use a hard money loan if you'd like to help leverage the rest of that. A lot of hard money lenders will partner with your IRA. They'll give you the additional capital to purchase the asset, to do all the contractor work, and then at the end of it, you pay them back their fee plus interest, and then you keep the rest and put it back into your IRA. As long as you're not doing any of the work, that's a pretty good approach. You can make very large profits fast. And fast is relative, right? It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. The sooner the better. You want to stick to a really important schedule. You want to manage your contractors and make sure there are no delays, or if there are delays, that you can mitigate the delays significantly, because time is money. And the more time you let go on, the higher your costs are, such as holding costs, your property taxes, your insurance to cover the property, the utilities costs while the property is in your possession, the possibility of things happening like vandalism or fire or any other builder's risk type issues. You want to make sure that the process is repeatable. Once you start doing fix and flip, you can get pretty consistent as long as you find a contractor you like working with and they are reliable. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That's what they always say. And a byproduct of this that I think doesn't really get played up, but I always like to point out, because I am a believer in this, is helping revitalize a community. You're generally getting the worst house on the block, right? And your neighbors are probably going to be pretty happy with you if you fix it up to market standards, because now it increases their value. They may actually be a good watchdog for you when you're not there working, or nobody's working on your property, to keep an eye out and make sure that it doesn't have squatters and vandalism. And again, that's really a matter of where are you looking in the first place for these properties to do your fix and flip. So those are the three physical real estates. I'm now going to shift gears a little bit and talk about residential real estate funds. If you don't want to touch any property yourself, you can get access to real estate. Those three types I just discussed, by investing in something called a REIT or even private hedge funds that focus on real estate. And essentially what they're doing is buying the assets that we just talked about and then providing them to you in a fund type scenario. There's a lot out there. Some are available for anyone and can be bought, through the stock market, even a share at a time. So you can get into an investment pretty low, a couple, $100, $1,000, 500, $5,000, up through accredited investors, where some of these hedge funds are looking for you to be accredited. You have to have a minimum investment of, $25, $50, $100,000, and there are commitment periods for participating as well. Sometimes as long as 10 years. Mostly on the 10 years, that's going to be on the commercial side. On the residential side, it's usually 3 to 5 years. And you buy them as shares, like I mentioned. The advantages that the funds are taking your money, pooling it with other investors so that they get better economies of scale when they're purchasing assets. They may go buy an entire block at a time, or 10 apartment complexes, for example. Or maybe they're doing fix and flips. There are a lot of communities out there, such as BlackRock is invested in Blackstone's Innovation Homes. That's a rental community. They have 80,000. You can invest in that if you're, part of their investor program and you're an accredited. How do you measure success? Well, it's measured by dividend income to you, and then your appreciated value of your shares over time. So let's talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. Some obvious benefits are that it's hands-off. You don't have to get involved. It's, a fix it and forget it type scenario, or sorry, set it and forget it type scenario. You invest, and it's a good fit if you want to diversify your portfolio, away from just stocks and bonds to get into some alternative assets, but you don't have the time, knowledge, or interest to engage directly in a real estate investment yourself. It does spread the risk across the entire portfolio so that, if one house burns down, it doesn't impact you 100%. It's really a very minimal impact to the portfolio in general. Again, a great way to protect yourself. It is professionally managed, so they know, a fund manager knows everything they need to know about what it is they're purchasing and managing, and their best interest is making sure as a fiduciary that they are increasing the value of their assets and providing you dividends if that's what the fund is designed to do. And it's 100% passive. Like I said, you don't have to be involved at all. I'm sorry, I neglected to mention that you can reinvest your dividends to increase your position. So that could be whether you're in an IRA or not. You don't have to have the distributions back to the IRA. But the disadvantages are that fund administrators will charge management fees anywhere from 1% to 3% of the investment you've put in, even if the fund ends up losing money. So just be aware of that. There's also something called carried interest, which essentially is bonuses paid for success, a percentage of the profits made by the fund. Those are paid to the fund administrators on top of any management fees, and it does gently reduce your returns as well. From a physical property characteristics perspective, it's being in a real estate fund, a residential real estate fund, has the same exact perils and risks associated with the properties as if you were buying one or you were involved in a multifamily. Why is that? Because that's what they're buying too, right? Yes, as I mentioned, you're spreading the risk across many, many assets, but you still have the same issues, right? Because there are physical property involved. And from a taxation perspective, really not in your IRA, but if you do this on your own, those dividends are taxable income. So ordinary income. They're not even long-term capital gains. But putting them back into your IRA would allow you to defer or even mitigate the taxes depending upon the type of IRA. Again, speak to your tax attorneys for your specific situation. All right. By the way, you have no say in what they buy. So, if you don't like that they purchased a house in Dubuque, Iowa for some reason, or you know, they have a multifamily down in New Orleans where Katrina flooded. That's too bad. You know, they're going to buy what they want to buy, and you're just along for the ride. The next category is near and dear to my heart, and that is direct investment in residential mortgage debt. As you saw in my bio a little while ago, I've done residential mortgage debt for over a decade. So let's talk about this, for example. This is where you can purchase individual mortgages, either through cash or your IRA. And when I say mortgages, those are considered notes or deed of trusts, but they're the same thing from this particular conversation, where they are loans that are secured by underlying real estate. So instead of owning the real estate, you own the paper that lent to the borrower the ability to purchase that real estate. Why is that important? Because you're able to collect payments from the borrowers who own that real estate, but you're not responsible for anything related to the house, for example, or the property. If it burns down, they're still responsible for paying you your mortgage. You know, if the toilet's back up, you don't fix it. You don't call Citibank and say, hey, help me because my toilets are backed up, right? You have to call your plumber if you're a borrower. How mortgage notes are purchased are through something called, you buy them at some sort of discount off of what's called the unpaid principal balance. I'll refer to that as the UPB. That's the amount that is owed. So let's say somebody borrows $100,000 on a house and they pay it for 3 or 4 years. And so the UPB is now $96,000. All right. Then you would purchase a mortgage at some discount. For a performing mortgage, that discount is very small, quite frankly. You know, you're looking for a yield of about 9%. That's the average yield that mortgages are performing mortgages are paying right now. So you might pay $90,000 to $92,000 for that $96,000 unpaid balance. And over time, you're collecting a little bit of principal every month, but a lot of interest. And so it's helping you build your IRA or your cash flow, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. I mentioned that you get the legal right to seize the property if the borrower stops paying. That's called a non-performing mortgage. You can buy those too, but I don't encourage you to do that unless you're highly skilled in this scenario, because it does have a lot of implications, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, but if you do buy a non-performing mortgage off the chute, you're going to pay somewhere around 65 to 70 cents for that same unpaid principal balance versus the 90 cents I talked about. It could become an active investment. You're collecting payments, everything's going along great, and then something like COVID comes along and people stop paying for their house, and the government let them stop paying for the house, right? So because of that, we have the issue of many times you're a lender and you held a mortgage that you weren't getting paid for up to 2 years. That is now considered a non-performing mortgage that you have to do something with in order to turn it back into performing or to get your money out of the investment. And how you succeed at this is by measuring the cash flow. So every month you're getting principal and interest payments. The interest payment is collected. It's most of the payment you collect every month, at least for the first 15 years of a loan. And then there's an arbitrage value. So I talked about you're buying the loan at a discount, whatever that discount amount is. If you choose to sell it in the future, you're going to sell it at the same or bigger value, higher value, at the now current unpaid principal balance. So, a scenario is you bought a $100,000 loan, or actually you bought a $96,000 loan, you paid $90,000 for it. You collect 5 years worth of payments, and now the UPB unpaid balance is just around $90,000, maybe $85,000, depends upon how fast the amortization schedule is and interest rate. But let's say it's $85,000. Then you sell it at 90% of that value. So without having a calculator in front of me, I'll say that's probably selling it around $75,000 to $80,000. Plus, you've collected 5 years worth of interest. So that's how you calculate your gains. and you divide it by your initial investment for a return. So what's the advantages of getting involved with individual notes? I'm going to start by saying, if you're buying a performing mortgage in your IRA, the whole idea behind that is you're setting it and forgetting it. You're hoping, and if you do your due diligence, and you should be able to collect payments for the length of the loan's duration, whatever that is. Or if you want to purchase, you can buy sometimes something called a partial loan, which means I just want to buy the next 5 years worth of payments, and you want that going back into your IRA to grow it. That's an important thing. However, you don't own the physical property. That's an advantage. You don't have to worry about municipalities, taxation. All that's on the responsibility of the people that have the loan that are paying you. But what happens potentially is they stop paying, and now you have an issue. Right? Oh, sorry. One thing I wanted to mention is you're not responsible for fixing a house, fixing the toilet, any of the things I talked about earlier. But what happens if they stop paying? Well, there are significant education required to be able to handle a non-performing mortgage, and quite frankly, whether if you want to be involved in mortgages, individual notes, you have to comply with a slew of legal and regulatory compliance. So things like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau has rules, CFPB, Dodd-Frank laws, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, which is called RESPA, and then there are local and state statutes as well. So it can be very complex. And if you have to foreclose to get your money back out, yes, you could theoretically get a property at a discount. But again, you didn't get into this notes business to own the property. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to hire an attorney to do the foreclosure. During that process, because the people aren't paying you, they're also not paying for their property taxes and insurance on the house, so there's additional costs. So you just want to be aware of that, and it does require you to be very involved in the process when things go wrong, and more importantly, involved with your IRA to see, are those payments coming in? And if they're not, you got to stay on top of it. So taking that to the next level, the final area that I wanted to talk about is investing in a residential mortgage debt fund, which essentially is taking the idea of investing in mortgage notes and deed of trust and creating a full portfolio. When you invest in a mortgage debt fund, you're essentially buying shares again in a fund. But because of that, you have a much lower risk profile than owning any physical notes, because if the borrower stops paying on one of those physical notes, it impacts you directly. This allows you to, by being in a portfolio of potentially hundreds of notes, it spreads the risk and the reward across all of the investors in that fund, just like we talked about earlier in the other classes. It also allows the fund administrator to pool those funds together so they get better discounts when they're purchasing loans from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, individual owners. It is truly a passive investment, and how you measure success is by receiving the dividends, like we talked about with any of the other funds, as well as the appreciated value of the shares over time. The nice thing about a fund is it has the opportunity to diversify not only in terms of what notes they purchase, but looking at things like mitigating risk of environmental hazards, geographical issues such as Hurricane Harvey in Houston. If you had a rental portfolio in Houston, because that's your patch, you could have been devastated by that, and waiting for insurance to pay on 20 different properties could be, really, it could take a long time. Let's just say, you're in Detroit, and in Detroit, there was a lot of shutdowns on the financial crisis. So if you have one note, you could be impacted, and those people could stop paying because their employer went out of business or laid them off. And as we all know, COVID happened, and we had the same kind of issues there. So what are the advantages? Well, you're not involved. As I mentioned, you're letting a fund manage the process for you. That means it's 100% cash flow passive cash flow investment. They do diversify to eliminate their downside risk that I talked about by professionally managing it, experts in the mortgage note industry. And one thing that I like to point out is it does make a social impact, and it can be significant for the families involved. A fallacy is that if you want to invest in a social impact scenario, you have to get lower profits. I completely disagree with that. Residential mortgage debt funds deliver both strong returns and can help people and families all across America at the same time. So I'm pretty passionate about that. There are disadvantages. Usually these type of funds are for accredited investors only. So it limits who can participate. It generally does require a longer term investment commitment. Anywhere from 3 to 5 years is the average. Dividends, again, are taxed as ordinary income. Now that's mitigated by the fact if you're using your IRA to invest, you're putting the dividends back into the IRA. And you have, just like the last REIT discussion, there's no control over what the fund purchases or any management decisions made on behalf of the fund itself. So those are the different classes of real estate that I'd like to talk about. Now, I want to summarize it by saying, you know, there's a lot of opportunities in the real estate investment world, and quite frankly, I only touched on 7. There's another dozen easily that I didn't talk about. You know, things like storage units, mobile home communities, commercial, you name it. So certainly, it's good to diversify your portfolio. You need to weigh the pros and cons of each of the ones I talked about, though, because some of them are going to be more valuable to you or more to your specific risk profile. So I always say, educate yourself, because you need to understand if it's something you want to be involved with. And as I mentioned, those are the ones you can use your IRA in participating in any one of those investments. So I did want to leave some parting thoughts before I conclude the presentation. And that's that I did mention there's a full paper that goes in depth on every one of these topics I just talked about. If you want to send me an email, I will be happy to forward you the full PDF. It's 18 pages long, and it goes much deeper into each of the scenarios. My email is right up on the screen, but it is Wayne, W-A-Y-N-E, at Crowd Capital, CROWDCAPITAL.io. I also encourage you to take a look at our fund if you're interested. You can do that very easily by going to our website and look at the fund page. And as I mentioned, our mission is to help families who are at risk of foreclosure keep their homes and increase their financial stability. And then finally, I'd encourage you to like and follow us on both LinkedIn and Facebook. With that in mind, I'm going to turn I'm going to stop sharing and turn the webcast back over to Brian.
All right. Thank you so much, Wayne. Okay. No, that was a great presentation. A lot of takeaways I got out of it. So we're going to start with Q&A. Anyone listening, if you have questions, go ahead and type those in the Q&A. We already have a couple coming in throughout the presentation. So I'm going to start with the first question. Will this be recorded? Yes, we record every single one of our workshops, and then we post them on our social media. So follow us on social media. I'll have the QR code right after this that you can follow us on, and you will be able to rewatch any recordings. We don't blast them out to everyone that registered, unfortunately, but you can find it on our website, on our social media, YouTube page, Facebook page. They're all available there for you. All right, next question. So this is more question for myself. What is the max contribution on a solo 401k by the employer and the employee? Okay, so as the employee of the solo 401k, you can contribute up to $20,500. It went up a little bit this year in 2022. And then as the employer, you can do a match, an employer match, just like I work for NuView Trust and I contribute to my 401k plan, and NuView can match a certain amount. You can do the same thing with the solo 401k. The maximum match is 25% of whatever your gross earned income is at the end of the year. So the most, in order to max it out, you have to have earned enough income, that 25% of it plus that employee contribution does not exceed the $61,000. If you're over the age of 50, the $6,500 catch-up contributions included on the employee side. So I hope that answers your question. And then the next question, can the employer match 100%? In the solo 401k, no, not 100%. You could do just the employer match, but it wouldn't be this. It wouldn't be a full $61,000. There has to be the employee. You have to subtract that employee contribution from it, and then whatever's left over is what you can contribute as the employer side. But you don't have to do both. You could do one or the other. Let's see. Next question, Wayne. This is for you. What are your thoughts on current landscape, and do you see a correction in the housing market or a larger collapse due to hyperinflation and associated rising interest rates?
Well, I think we're already seeing that to some degree. I mean, I live in the Boston area, and the market has been superheated for a long time. But if I just look around the country, you know, you're starting to see cracks in the situation. The average days on market for properties were sometimes minutes, not days, in the past, but we're starting to see that to slow down a little bit. I do think the rising mortgage interest rates for new sales is starting. It hasn't hit a big issue at any point yet, but we are seeing the cracks. And as it turns out, mortgage rates are now in the 5+% range. You know, they just readjusted recently. You know, so I started seeing like Rocket Mortgage and others. I will tell you, we're a mortgage debt fund. And so one of the things I believe is going to happen is we're going to see a lot more delinquencies in mortgages because the government has propped up families who are struggling for as long as 2 years. But what hasn't really caught up with that is the fact that with the inflation rising and the interest rates rising, most of the people that are struggling to maintain their housing payments are also over leveraged, we'll say, you know, using credit cards and things like that. So now that they have potentially filled up their credit cards in the past when the interest rates were sub 1%, and maybe, you know, you're seeing variable rate credit cards increasing their minimum monthly payments. What doesn't come out, and I read it recently in a CoreLogic report, is that because of the valuations of properties increasing so dramatically, property tax values are increasing, which means that, you know, people are paying more to pay to the counties that they have their houses in. Their insurance rates are going up, and so it's just an unusual dynamic where we have a rising tide floating the boats in a bad way potentially. I also see that you know, we do think the correction started. I don't have the crystal ball. I just see that, you know, I see some things here that say that it's very likely that we're in the beginning of a slowdown. I will not say we're going to have a massive housing crash like we did last time. I think a lot of the banks have done a lot to keep that in check. But for example, I do know some fix and flippers are struggling to get properties, but all of a sudden they're getting bids accepted that they weren't getting, you know, 6 months ago. So maybe that means the competition is getting less. Maybe it means it's harder to get access to capital to purchase these things. You guys as private lenders, that could be an interesting opportunity as well, you know, because if people need capital, as a private lender using your IRA, you have to vet the people very well, of course, but you might be a good way to infuse capital for people to take advantage of the situation. Our fund, you know, we're seeing a lot of opportunity to help families because they're starting to see the pain points.
Yeah, those are some definitely good points. We're seeing similar trends in Florida. You know, Florida's always been a hot market, but we're seeing less turnaround time, houses on the market a little bit longer, obviously because of the interest rates, compared to, like you said, minutes where, you know, something goes on the market and it's gone by the next day. So yeah, I mean, very similar. I think it's across the United States. We'll see what happens. We don't really know. We can't predict it, but we could just pay attention.
Right.
Wait,
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Can you type your email address again? Put it in the chat for everyone. A few people are asking for it.
I sure can. So it is
okay. The next question is, what is the best way to get started? get started with a self-directed IRA, or are you trying to get started with investing into the crowd fund? That's two totally different things. But if you want to use a self-directed IRA, the best way to get started is to have a consultation with myself or someone on my team. You can reach me, and I will have my contact information on the next page as well. You can reach me at B Martinez for Brian. So B Martinez at NuView, spelled NuView trust.com. We can set up a one-on-one consultation, figure out what you're working with, what's eligible to be rolled over to an IRA. And then from that point, you'll work with our transactions team and let them know what you want to invest in. You'll fill out what's called a purchase authorization form while we're waiting for the cash. And then as soon as the cash is available from your previous IRA company or 401k company, then now you can start making these alternative type of investments.
And just to add, if you're asking about how to get started in the real estate investing, I actually encourage you to read that paper that I was just referring to. You can rewatch the recording of this, obviously, but then you go in a little more depth. I would suggest reading the paper.
There you go. And Wayne's email is posted in the chat for anyone that was looking for it. Any other questions?
Be aware, it does say .io, not .com.
I don't see any other questions, but like I said, if you want to reach myself or anyone on my team, this is another email address. It's iraspecialists@NuViewTrust.com. And you can stay in touch with us as well through, like I said, our social media. Go ahead and scan the QR code. That'll take you to our link tree. And then there's a variety of platforms that you can follow NuView on. And last thing, we are running a promotion for August. It does expire August the 15th. This will save you $50 on your application fee. You can scan that QR code to get to the application page. Or if you have any questions, reach out to myself. And the promo code is AUG22. All right, everyone, we're going to wrap it up. Wayne, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to educate some of our clients and prospects on how they can be avid investors in real estate. Everyone, we will see you next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate your time.